I am Matt Peters, director of Babylon 5 Road Home.
Which one wants to start?
Whoever wants to start.
Okay.
So how did this movie get greenlit and on the boards and produced?
I'm not entirely sure. Joe will be better explaining that, but I know for me, what happened was I was working with Rick Morales on some other film projects, and I was all queued up and ready to work on another film, and was going to be directing that movie, and then as Babylon was offered to him, he immediately knew that I would be interested in working on it, because I like science fiction, and he thought it would be a really good fit for me. So he pitched it to me, and I said, let me watch the show. So I had heard of the show, but I hadn't seen it. So I started watching the show, and I started to binge episode after episode, and I said, yeah, put me on this. So I ended up getting a lucky break of being able to direct this movie.
How early on in the process did you realize you were going to have the original cast back to voice these characters?
That was pretty soon. It was like, I know that when I started doing my research for the show and I was watching it, I became a fan, basically. I kept doing more and more research, so then obviously I heard about, some of the actors that were no longer with us. So that was something that I was wondering would be, are we going to recast entirely, or would it be, some of the original actors coming back? And Rick was very much, he was like, I know that Joe really wanted to bring the cast together, and he spoke to them, and he wanted to make sure that they felt comfortable with the idea of doing this show with other actors that would be performing in place of the other characters. And once everybody was happy to do with it, we just kind of ran with it after that.
What tone? Which season would you say the tone of this is closest to? Because they all kind of have a different tone and beat.
It's like, I thought you were going to ask me my favorite season, which is season 3. But I think I would say, honestly, I never thought about it before in terms of tone. It feels like it would match probably season 4, if not also maybe season 2, because it really is like a love letter to the characters. It's a love letter to the show and to the fans, and I felt that season 4 kind of best captured that kind of spirit. Yeah.
How do you make this one, your own, without, kind of stepping on what's already been done, but also paying tribute to what has also been done?
Well, it was really interesting to be able to focus on the show, because I became a fan of the show by doing my research for it, and Rick was one as well. And so Joe was really super supportive. He gave us all the support that you could ever imagine. He was not strict. He did not want things to be done a particular way. He let us discover the movie that we wanted to tell. And he always said, do what you guys want, and if we go too far, he'll let us know. And so at that point, Rick and I worked together on a couple other productions ourselves, so we just kind of followed our instincts, and we wanted to tell the story that we thought would work best for not just the show, but for this movie. So we focused mostly on the movie. We didn't want to get too carried away about whether or not we were doing things correct.
So when it comes to live action versus animation for this type of story, was there any sort of benefit or anything about the story that specifically had strings to do this one animation?
I do think that with doing this in animation, we were able to do a lot more different things with camera. There were a lot of different things. We could also expand on sets and things. The show was limited, obviously, by the fact that it was live action, whatever budget that they had. And we still had our budget to deal with, too. But with animation, we're able to kind of smooth out the wrinkles a little bit more, because we don't have to actually deal with a 3D world. We're dealing with an artificial world. So that was something that was definitely, I think, part of the charm and the excitement about working on this project, was being able to kind of add a flair to the TV show that maybe the TV show didn't have the opportunity to do.
With these being well-known characters in the world, how did you go about choosing what type of animation style and look of the show?
We had Rick and I worked together on another movie called the Battle of the Super Sons, and we used a CG 2D effect on that one, which we really fell in love with. We thought it was great. And that was the first question I asked Rick is, are we going to be doing the same thing? He said, absolutely. And we felt that worked because we were going to do a stylized version of Babylon 5. I mean, we weren't going to make it look like we weren't going to make it look like the actors in some kind of 3D capture, like an action figure. We wanted to do a stylized version of that. and we knew that doing a 2D blend of CG would be the best way to pull that off. I think the show looks fantastic, or the movie rather. I think looks fantastic. One of our best looking things.
How long did it take to complete the project from start to finish? How long did it take to animate it?
Oh my gosh, that's a tough one because it's like generally I think when I start working on the project, it's at the beginning of story, and by the time I leave the project, I go work on another film, but they're still putting the animation together. So I think it was about 2 years start to finish. Yeah, roughly about that. Yeah. Rick's a better person to ask for that.
So you mentioned all the binging you did. Did that also include any of the television movies and spin-offs of the whole thing, or did you just focus on the main 5 seasons?
I focused on the main 5 seasons because of the fact that I knew from reading the script that it was going to focus on those things. I think I did take a peek at the one TV movie that's a bit of a prequel, but I didn't get too far into it. But what I did end up doing was, apparently this is like what happens to everybody who starts watching the show like I did, like later. You can't help but start getting fascinated with this universe, and you start looking up things online. So I just fell into rabbit holes, constantly looking up things online, and it became more and more of a fan that way.
Is that how you kind of drifted towards the alternate timeline aspect that's a part of this movie?
Well, Joe had that all figured out. So it was like he gave us a script that had everything, like, all the bells and whistles were there. So we were really capturing what Joe wanted to tell us a story. And it was just such a great script that we just saw the opportunity to really enjoy on it. But it did create a challenge for us because I started to kind of notice all the different things about how characters looked, because you have, goatees and then no goatees, and then, different robes and things. And every time that comes into play, you have to create a new design for it, which inflates our budget and everything like that. But Rick was adamant about making sure that this show was accurate. We didn't want to cheap out on any of that stuff.
So I gotta ask, because when I first watched it took me about 3 weeks to binge watch the whole show. How long did it take you?
I got it done in about 1 month because basically it became my job. And that was like the best part about it. I was between movies at the time, so they put me on this project, and I think I was doing about 4 episodes a day, and it was just fantastic. And I know that Rick started watching it, and when he started watching it, he stopped midway through because he wanted to watch it with his wife, and they just wanted to binge it together. So, which apparently is pretty common.
Was there anything in your research that you were very adamant that you wanted to include in this movie?
There was one thing that I love to point out because it's just a little bit of nerdism thing, is that while I was watching the show, I couldn't help but notice details because you're watching episode after episode, and I noticed that Bruce Boxleitner is left-handed, so he had his device on his other hand compared to some of the other actors. And normally that's something that in animation we would just like ignore it, pretend it's not there, because it would save us a cost by, reusing bodies and things. And when I mentioned it to Rick, I was like, hey, did you notice that he's left-handed? He was like, no, we got to do that. We need to make sure that tracks, which created a whole set of problems for me because I had to make sure that overseas was making sure that they were on the right hand. And so that was a lot of, or the storyboards had to match. So, yeah.
There are a lot of Easter eggs in the movie to reference stuff in the show that isn't really overtly called out here.
I don't know if there was Easter eggs. I know that what I tried to do is that there was definitely a lot of shots of Babylon 5 that were reused in the show. So, like when the cannons would come out and things like that. And because I binged the show and I would recognize these things, I was like, well, then I want to see that in this movie. So I made sure that was like something that we did. We would try to reference the show as often as possible. There's also a scene in the movie where there is a series of screens and they're showing all these various timelines, and I had to actually go through and find different scenes from the actual show to put in there. So we were actually we have taken small clips. If you actually look at that scene, there are small clips from the show from various seasons that we re-rendered in CG with our design aspect for this movie. So somebody's going to do it. Somebody's going to go online. They're going to pause on that big screen and they're going to tell you which scene is from which show.
How long did it take to grab all those?
That took me. That was at the end of production because after that I had to. We normally make an Act A, Act B, and Act C. We had to create an artificial Act D to essentially fill in all that information, and I had to get the crew to hammer out those scenes really quickly, and then be able to animate that as well. So Yeah.
Was there any deviation from the original script that you saw to the final product?
From the original script that Joe gave us for this movie?
Yeah.
Not really. No, I mean, what he gave us was fantastic. It was a really sweet script, a really sweet story. So we all just hopped on board. It was kind of an open shut case, really. He got something well written that good, and he wrote so much of the show. He knows what he's doing, so it was just easy to follow his lead. Am I supposed to be going?